Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. Okay, we got a couple of new folks here tonight, I think, and welcome. And the rules of the game are everybody is muted until you want to say something. And if you want to say something, you just unmute yourself and say away, because it's totally interactive here. And I have yet to kick anybody off because I didn't like what they said. So I think we're in good shape. All right. So beginning here, this is still important here, our map of Assyria and the Assyrian Empire, because during this study tonight, the Assyrian Empire just pretty much folds and it's gone away. So we're just being completely gone away with that, but then it gets supplanted with the Babylonian Empire. And so and here's our timeline. We're way down here. We're down at Josiah. You can see this part down here, and you see the prophets that are around during Josiah's time: Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Joel, Jeremiah, Nahum. A lot of prophets that were writing and were active during the time of Josiah, and perhaps maybe that was one of the reasons that Josiah had such a successful reign, is because he had a lot of good advisors. And so going ahead tonight, I was thinking about all of this rain that we've had, and what does here. I mean, we've had more rain right here in the Houston area so far this year than maybe Israel gets all year long. And so I thought, well, you know what about how did they capture rain? I don't know if y'all know this stuff or not. So if you already know it, then just go get you a drink or something like that while we're talking about this. But they had what they call cisterns. Now, in this country, we back in the day, and even now today, we have cisterns, rainwater catchment, where you take water off of your roof or some other place, and it goes into a tank of some sort. And then that way, especially in places like San Antonio and out further out west in Texas, where rain is less prolific than it is right here, that it's important to capture all the rain that you can get, because it's a valuable commodity. Water is, of course, the most important commodity in all of the world, because that's what you make coffee out of. And so in Israel, they had these cisterns, and I've been in several of them when we were over there and going through some of the countryside, and they were pretty impressive. In fact, these big holes down in the ground. They would dig these things out, chisel them out of the stone, and then they would go in there and plaster them with a lime cement slurry stuff. And it's amazing. And some of these cisterns that I went into, that these things are 2,000, 2,500 years old, and they still got plaster on the walls that are holding. I mean, I guess they would hold water if they hadn't, if the catchment system was still in place. And a lot of these things, of course, the catchment system is no longer in place, because they just don't they don't do it that way anymore. Israel is got much better ways of using water for irrigation and for the people, and they are the reigning kings of water usage and water desalination and that sort of thing. So, but a cistern, in case you don't know, it's all it is just a man-made catch basin or reservoir. And even in this country, you would sometimes have houses that they built the house over a tank or a cistern. And so underneath your foundation of your house, instead of having a basement, they would have a cistern, and in that way you could put a pump in the house, and you would be able to get water out of this cistern. Now, of course, the water quality there is going to be a little bit dodgy because it's not running water, and you'd probably have critters in it and so forth, but it beats the alternative of not having water, because if you got nasty water, at least you can boil it, strain it, get the critters out of it. And but if you don't have water at all, then you're basically you're reduced to just scotch or bourbon or wine or something like that. So it's probably better to have water available for you. These cisterns were fed through natural or man-made waterways, that in some cases we would call them swales. Another, a man-made one might be an aqueduct, where they're taking water from a place, say where they have a lot of snow melt, and they've run the water from the snow melt into these aqueducts. And there are still, throughout Israel, there are places where they have aqueducts that were built by the Romans to carry water to various cities throughout Israel. Of course, they're not functional anymore, but the structure is there in like in Caesarea Maritime, right there on the Mediterranean coast. There's a great, beautiful example of an aqueduct right there that's still standing, and it's been there for over 2,000 years. And so these cisterns were multi-purpose, in fact, because sometimes they would use them for throwing a prisoner down there. In Joseph, when his brothers got tired of his heirs, they threw him into a dry cistern. And then later on, they pulled him out and sold him to the Ishmaelites, and goes on to Egypt and saves the world. The rest is history. But Jeremiah was also thrown in a cistern at one point, and they used it for a dungeon. And so it could be, it's a very dark, dank place, and probably had mud in the bottom and so forth. So not a very pleasant place to stay, but they're really interesting things. Now, here's some pictures of cisterns in ancient Israel, and in some cases they were just basically a big cylinder, and the women would lower pots or something into the water, then haul it back up. Hard, heavy work. Or they would go down steps. Here you can see where they would have steps that they would walk down, and then they would still have to carry the water pot back up. And so I went in one in Megiddo, and then down in all the way down in Masada. There's here, in fact, here's a cistern, the main cistern in Masada. And that particular place, they had all alongside the mountain, they had waterways or courses cut into the side of Masada, that the water would, when it rained, the water would go alongside the mountain into these little troughs and down into tanks, that then they would then take the water from those smaller tanks and then pour it into the big cistern. And that's a lot of work, but it also meant survival. And when the Romans finally captured Masada, it was not because they ran out of food or water. They had plenty of both, but they were just totally overwhelmed. The siege engine that the Romans built knocked down the walls, and the defenders of Masada couldn't possibly win against that many Romans, and so that's why they ended up taking their own lives rather than being captured and becoming slaves or being tortured or whatever. But that's the cistern there in Masada. And as you can see, it's pretty big, and you can see these smooth walls here. That is still plaster from a couple of thousand years ago. And here at Beth Shemesh is another one, and this is just kind of a stylized drawing of how that one is constructed, and it was in kind of a T or a cross thing, but they had water channels. This is just like one of them that's representative here of how the water would go into there and then down and so forth. We saw the same kind of stuff in Qumran and just various other places all throughout Israel. This was very, very common to have these things. And here's more of a natural cistern here, and you can see the steps coming down, and of course over the years it's kind of filled up with sand and so forth, but back in the day it would not have particularly had that much sand in it, and so that's the end of that little bit of your time in history. And are there any questions about cisterns? Anything that you might want a question or a story or anything like that? So, okay. Now, we're going to start out with Josiah. He was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jedida, daughter of Adiah of Bozkath. Now, he did what was right in the eyes of Adonai and walked in all the ways of his father David and turned not aside to the right or to the left. And so now there are a couple of things here. You remember what happened. You had Manasseh, who was the Bible said that he was the most evilest king of all of them. I mean, he made Ahab look like a piker. And then he got carried off to Babylon with a fishhook in his nose, and he got religion. He got religion big time, and came back to Israel or back to Judah in Jerusalem, and was very, 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 very careful to obey God's laws and do everything that he was supposed to do. Then he died, and his son Ammon, he became king, and he ruled for a couple of years, and he was so rotten. I mean, he even tried to outdo his father in being nasty and evil. And so his own court, the people in his own staff, killed him. And then the people of Israel came in, and they took care of business. They took all of the people that had gone in there and installed Ammon. They came in there, killed all of them, executed all of them, and then they installed Ammon's 8-year-old son, who was, his name is of course Josiah. That's who we're going to be studying tonight. But so I just thought it was kind of interesting that Josiah would have been 6 years old when his grandfather Manasseh, who had by this time had become more of a godly king, that he was 6 years old when he died, and then Ammon, his father, then he would have been 8 years old when he died, when he was killed. And so that what it meant was that Ammon was only 14 when his son Josiah was born. If you count up the deal, and I was trying to figure this out. If okay, that's the numbers and all that kind of stuff, and I wasn't really sure. And then I read in one of the commentaries, yes, Amon was about 14 when Josiah was born, and they said that was not unusual in the ancient Middle East, that someone, as soon as they reached puberty, then they would have an early marriage, and then they would have children, because at some point there, that life was tough back in those days, and so you had to start your families early. And of course, there was a lot of nuclear family there, so you had grandma and great grandma there, and the whole family's together, and so it was possible that they could do that sort of thing. And so but looking at some other stuff, the mother, Josiah's mother, was Yedidah. Then she was the daughter of Adiah, Adiyahu, actually, in Hebrew. Adiyahu is his name, but he was a Levite of the Gershom tribe, or the clan, actually, of Levi. So he was not a priest, but he was a Levite, and so therefore it looks like that being from Gershom, he had certain duties within the temple business, not being a priest, but had other businesses there, other responsibilities within temple service. He might have, I can't remember if it was Gershom or Kohat that were the singers. There were one of the clans were the singers, and I'm having a senior moment right now to try to remember exactly which one it was. But one of the clans, their job, they were the temple musicians, and they led praise and worship, and they played the trumpets and the horns and the lyres and the stringed instruments and the cymbals and all the different things that they had. And so this factor here, that his mother was the daughter of a Levite, kind of tells me that that's probably the single most important factor in Josiah being a godly king. And the other deal is that here he is, 8 years old, and he must have had good, godly people that were surrounding him and helping him to be the king, and kind of in guardianship or something, to make sure that he made good decisions until he was at an age where he could. And so here's a map. Maps. This down here, the dark green, was what was left over of Judah after the Assyrians kind of cleaned house around everything. But then during the reign of Josiah, he kind of went back in and just assumed control of all of these other parts that, basically a major part of all of what was Israel before. And he didn't get quite far up into Dan and so forth, and Tyre and all the up here in the northern part, and then also these areas over here, what had been Manasseh and Ephraim and Dan, or not Dan, Gad and Reuben over here on the east side of the river. That he didn't quite take over all of that, but still he increased. Looks like he increased the land mass that he had before by 100%. He's twice as big as he was before, and so that kind of gives you an idea of what his kingdom, the kingdom of Josiah, looked like. Remember, the northern tribes, they had been beaten by Assyria. But at this time, by this time in history, Assyria was on the decline, and in fact, they had pretty much just left all of the any ruling authorities and so forth in this part of Israel. They'd pretty much left, and they'd lost their power because they were being harassed by the Babylonians, and in fact, eventually got beaten by the Babylonians. So going on in the 8th year, are there any questions on that so far? About the chronology of it and how all that took place? Any comments or questions? Just jump in there. In the 8th year of his reign, while he was still young, he began to seek after the God of his father David. In the 12th year, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem from the high places, the Asherah poles, the carved and molten images. They tore down the altars of the Baal in his presence and chopped down the sun images that were above them. Also, the Asherah poles and the carved and molten images, he smashed it into pieces, ground into dust, so there was nothing left, and scattered upon the graves of those who had sacrificed to them. All right, so he was doing a very, very thorough job. At the age in fact, let's go ahead with this other, because it finishes off the story. Then he burned the bones of the priests on their altars, so he purged Judah and Jerusalem. Now, here's where it talks about the expansion, his expansion. It just doesn't say it, but it explains where he was, so that tells me that, yeah, he was in control there. In the towns of Manasseh, Ephraim, Simeon, and as far as Naphtali, with their surrounding ruins, he broke down the altars, the Asherah poles, crushed the carved images into powder, and chopped down all the sun images throughout all the land of Israel. Then he returned to Jerusalem. So he made a foray. I mean, it probably took him a couple of 3 years or so to go up there and just destroy all of the pagan rule that worship that had been there. And he began, remember, he was 8 years old when he became king, and then he was probably under some tutelage or guardianship of his mother and a Levite, or maybe even the priest or something in Jerusalem. At age 16, then it said he began to earnestly seek the Lord, and that how he would have done that, would it have been reading what they had, or what available things did they have, or did he there was still oral traditions that were going on? And as the reason that I'm making those comments is because later on we talk about discovering the book of the law and how important that was. So he, at 16, he began to really seek the Lord as to what he should be doing and how he should be reigning, and everything about what the kind of man he should be. So after 4 years of this intense study and seeking the Lord, he began, in his own. By this time, he would have been age 20, and that is a majority age in Israel at the time. So he began destroying all of those pagan altars and everything that was associated with Baal and Asherah, the Asherah poles, and all the things that we talked about last week. I'm not going to go back and revisit all of those, because they were pagan religions, pagan little g gods. And so he started tearing down all those altars, and he chopped down the sun images. Remember that his grandfather Manasseh had started worshiping the zodiac, and he read his horoscope every day in the paper, so he'd know what he was doing that day. But so he went back through there and all throughout Jerusalem and Judah, and knocked down all of those images. And he chopped them up smashed them into pieces, and it says it ground them into dust so that there was nothing identifiable left of them, totally destroying these images of paganism. And so then he expanded his influence, like I said, up into the northern part, what had been Israel. Now he was able to go up there because the Assyrians, yeah, they had come down there, they had assimilated and so forth, but they were no longer a force to be reckoned with. And plus, what he was doing, he was not conquering things, he was going up there and rearranging the religion, which the Assyrians obviously didn't care or didn't have the power to do anything with anyway. And so he was expanding, and he was changing the whole face of Israel and Judah by the time he was, he started this when he was 20 years old. So quite the reformer at a very young age. Now, in the it says in the 18th year of his reign, and that would have made him 36 years old, he after purging the land, of course it said from his 8th year to his well, it had been the 8th, 12th year. So for about 8 years there, I guess he had been trying to purge the land. So it took him a while. After purging the land and the house, he sent Shaphan, son of Azaliah, Maaseiah, the governor of the city, and Joah, son of Jehoaz, the recorder, to repair the house of Adonai his God. They came to Hilkiah, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and handed over the silver money that was brought into the house of God, which the Levites, the gatekeepers, had collected from Manasseh, Ephraim, and all the remnant of Israel, as well as from all Judah and Benjamin and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Now, like I said, he was 36 years old when he began the restoration of the temple. Now, this money had been collected throughout Judah as well as Israel. Again, here he was taking money, taking the tithes, the temple taxes, the things that were required by Torah, and he was taking that money and bringing it back for the temple. And something that's important to look at here, I think, is that they collected money from Manasseh, Ephraim, and all the remnant of Israel. They didn't name the other tribes, but they did name Manasseh, Ephraim, and the remnant. So that tells me that, okay, the lost tribes of Israel were not lost. They were still there. They were still identifiable. Assyria did not wipe out or destroy all of Israel and disperse all of the Jewish people from the northern tribes. This is just one more example right here of the fact that there were people that survived, and they were identifiable by their tribal affiliations. And so the idea, again, that the lost tribes were lost, it just is not, it's not there. I'd mentioned that the Assyrian rule pretty much largely disappeared. They were no longer the strong threat that they were before. And going on, they one of the things that was interesting, they took this money and they brought it back and they gave it to the priest. It says, okay, give it to the foreman, and he will give it to the workers, all of the craftsmen and everything. And don't an accounting of this is not required, because I know these guys are going to do what's right. They are doing what's right, and I know that they will. And so, I mean, that's incredible trust on the part of a king, and probably not terribly that's not the usual thing, because normally whenever you got large sums of money, they're wanting an accounting of it because they just know somebody's going to cheat. But Josiah was he was a godly man. He expected everyone around him to be godly, and he says, don't do an accounting of it, because these guys are they are righteous. They will do the right thing. So I thought that was a very, very interesting thing, and there's no evidence or no writing that there were cheaters. So a lot of times what you expect out of people is what you get out of them. You expect bad out of people, you get bad out of them. You expect goodness out of people, and that's what you can expect. And kind of like with your kids, your family, your workers, you expect excellence out of somebody, and hold them to that standard of excellence, and hold yourself to that same standard of excellence. That's what you'll get out of it, is excellence. And so it's that self-fulfilling prophecy. You take care of people, and they'll take care of you. You constantly downgrade a person and belittle them, then that's what you're going to get to. You're going to get a broken person. So, okay, that's not in the script. Okay, that was just a little bit of preaching here tonight. All right, going ahead. While they were bringing out the silver that had been brought into the house of Adonai, Hilkiah the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, found a Torah scroll of Adonai given by Moses. Hilkiah responded by telling Shaphan, the scribe, he says, I have found a scroll of the Torah in the house of Adonai. Hilkiah gave the scroll to Shaphan. Then Shaphan brought the scroll to the king, and moreover returned a report to the king, saying, your servants are doing everything that was committed to them. They have melted down the silver that was found in the house of Adonai, handed it over to the overseers and under the hand of the workmen. Shaphan, the scribe, also said, oh yeah, Hilkiah the Kohen gave me a scroll, and he didn't say gave me a scroll of the Torah, and this is the word of God. He says, yeah, the Kohen gave me a scroll, and Shaphan read it in the presence of the king. When the king heard the words of the Torah, he tore his clothes. So he was. This servant, this Shaphan, the scribe, he didn't have a clue. And he didn't, it was like a second thought. He was given reports of the construction on the temple, what they were doing, the repairs, and so on and so forth. And it says, oh yeah, and we also found this scroll that Hilkiah found this scroll here. You can have that. And so, but he read it in the presence of the king. When he read that, the king was immediately under conviction, because he tore his clothes, and then he said, he commanded Hilkiah he said, go inquire of Adonai for me and for the remnant in Israel. Again, talking about that remnant in Israel, they were not lost, and in Judah, concerning the words of the book that has been found. For great is the wrath of Adonai that will be poured out upon us, because our fathers did not observe the word of Adonai to do according to all that is written in this scroll. So what we find here is Josiah read this thing, and it doesn't really tell us how he figured. It just says, he didn't tell his servants, go and look up Jeremiah or Zephaniah or Nahum or one of those prophets that are already writing books. But he said, just go and request of Adonai what we're supposed to do, and how we can repent of all of this. And so what did they do? They went and found this lady called Huldah, and it kind of showed that Josiah, his humility possibly in taking counsel from a woman. But that and I'm making a stretch here, okay? I'm making a stretch. I think that he probably was so well taught by his own mother and grandfather, maternal grandfather, but that his mother was such an influence on him and in a godly way that it was not a problem for him to then take godly counsel from a holy woman or a righteous woman. Now we know that this woman, they went to the Huldah, the prophetess, the son of Shulam of Tokahath, and the son of Hazra, keeper of the wardrobe. Now she was living in Jerusalem in the second quarter, and they spoke to her about this. All right, so who was she? There were other prophets that were living in Jerusalem right then, and there was Jeremiah, there was Zephaniah, and there was possibly Nahum and Habakkuk, and there were others possibly, but they went to this woman. Now, who was she? She's the only female prophetess that is mentioned in the book of Kings, and I couldn't find anything other than her in as far as a prophetess in the book of Chronicles. And so just other this particular reference, and that's all we know about her. And it says that she was the wife of Shulam, who was the keeper of the wardrobe. Now it does not indicate that she was part of the wardrobe, that the wardrobe that they're talking about was not the priestly vestments and garments. So it was most probably that she was part of the palace staff, of the king's own personal staff, that her husband took care of the king's clothing and that sort of thing. So she's not royalty, she's not of the priesthood, but she was recognized as someone through whom the Lord spoke, and they recognized that. And it's interesting, because then she says, "Thus says Adonai," not what I'm saying, but this is what the Lord is saying. Said, "Tell the man who sent you to me." Now this tells me that she was not some government bureaucrat, because if it had been a government bureaucrat, a courtier of that day and age, she would have had all sorts of flowery language. "Go and tell to the supreme, most high, godly man, or whatever, Josiah, whom the world relies on," all that, going on and on and on about that sort of foolishness. No, she says, "Go tell the man that sent you about this." And it says, "Thus says Adonai, I'm bringing," it was a two-part prophecy. Now it says, "I'm bringing disaster on this place and on its inhabitants, all the curses that are written in the book that they have read before the king of Judah, for they have forsaken me and have burned incense to other gods in order to provoke me with all the works of their hands. Therefore, my wrath will be poured out on this place, and it will not be quenched." All right. So there's the first part of that. It says, "But to the king of Judah who sent you to inquire of Adonai, thus you will say to him, Thus says Adonai, the king of the God of Israel." Again, she's not saying it. She's saying, this is what the Lord is saying. Regarding the words which you have heard, because your heart was tender and you humbled yourself before God when you heard his words against this place and against the inhabitants, and you have humbled yourself before me, torn your clothing, wept before me, I have heard you, says Adonai. Behold, I will gather you to your fathers, and you will be buried in your grave in shalom, in peace. And your eyes will not see all the evil that I will bring upon this place and upon the inhabitants. So they brought her back to the king. They brought her word back to the king. All right. So what we have here is a woman who, truly she hears from the Lord, and gives a true report back back to King Josiah. And I'm hesitating a little bit because my monitor is messing up here. But anyway, she gives this report back, and it's the first part of it absolutely did come true. And then there are those that said, well, the second part didn't come true because he didn't die in peace. He died in battle. He died in war. Well, you know, you can still be at war and die in peace. You can be at peace with your maker and still die. The country itself was not under attack. And so the terrible thing that did happen to Israel or to Judah later on, it happened several years after, about 4 years after Josiah had died, and he was killed in battle. So we just see that what she did say was true. The second part of it, you have to parse it a little bit, because there are those that said, aha, see here, she was not a true prophetess because he didn't die in peace. But yes, it is still possible to die in battle and still be at peace with the Lord, at peace with what you're doing. And yeah, it's not peaceful, but you're at peace. So that's my interpretation of it anyway. Then the king sent and gathered together all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. The king went up to the house of Adonai with all the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the Kohanim, the Levites, and all the people from the oldest to the youngest. And I don't know how they do that, and I don't know exactly how that means. You know, or what that means, because it's kind of like us saying, yeah, we had a party the other night at our house and everybody in town was there. Well, obviously that's not the case, but all the people from the oldest to the youngest, that would indicate that they had a large crowd, and it was not restricted just to the older people, but they said everybody from the oldest, there I use that word, everybody, all encompassing, the oldest down to the youngest. And it says that the king, he read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant that was found in the house of Adonai. Now, then the king stood in his place and made a covenant before Adonai to follow Adonai and to observe his mitzvot, his regulations and his decrees with all his heart, with all his soul, and to obey the words of the covenant written in this book. Moreover, he made all that were found in Jerusalem and Benjamin, the tribe around Jerusalem, stand with him. The inhabitants of Jerusalem did according to the covenant of God, the God of their fathers. Josiah removed all the abominations from the whole territory of Bani Israel, and made all who were found in Israel to worship Adonai, their God, all his days. They did not turn away from following Adonai, the God of their fathers. So what a sweeping thing that Josiah was able to do here. And just I find it incredible that, okay, he's there and he read, it said that he read the entire book. Now, what did he read? There are some of the Bible scholars that said, well, he read, it was the book of Deuteronomy. So he read the book of Deuteronomy. Well, even at that would have taken a long time to read the book of Deuteronomy to everybody. And, you know, it's been hours and hours, but if he were to read all the Torah, so we don't know exactly what it was, but based on what he did and some of the wording that he used, it was it was most certainly book of Deuteronomy was in there. And then it was likely that they found a complete Torah scroll. And so anyway, he read that to all the people. They cut a covenant right then and there with the Lord and said, we will we will follow you. And then he went up to, had them go all the way up to end again through Israel, the Manasseh, Ephraim, and Naphtali, and those areas that he could, and required those people that you will obey, you will follow God's laws, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. No longer will you do anything with Baal or an Asherah or anything like that. You will follow God. He required all of them to worship God exclusively and nothing else, no one else. And so then he did something else that they talk about in chapter 35, 2 Chronicles 35. He celebrated Passover. Now, before I go on, any comments or questions so far on this?
Yeah, I just find it incredible that he has become a godly man and did all this quote study, but there's no Torah scroll. And then even he's
You're cutting out, Carl.
all of this sort of thing. How would they do that with no Torah scroll? That's the instructions for all of this.
I suspect that what they had were fragments. They had partials, and they had oral Torah that they had been following. That's what I suspect, that they didn't have like the whole enchilada at one time, but they had a page here, page there. Because remember, during the kings before, they were going through there and trying to destroy all the works, all the words and writings that would teach the people about Adonai. And so, but obviously that this scroll survived, and so there must have been other bits and pieces that survived also. But you know, they did have the oral Torah that was handed down from father to son, and you know, taught by some of the godly people anyway, that were the remnant of God's people, the ones that followed him. But yeah, you're right. It's one of those kind of the things that you just look at and you shake your head. Now, how did he do that? But you know, I think he had a very godly mother and a very godly maternal grandfather too, in that Levites. Chapter 35. He celebrated Passover, and it goes, chapter 35 is just it's just a description of all of the things that they did for this big Passover. And it was you know, they hadn't had a Passover like this since Hezekiah, but the Bible also says, you know what, they've never had a Passover like this since the days of Samuel, back in the Judges days. And so they had like 30,000 goats that they killed and sacrificed for the Passover meal, and 3,000 bulls. And then the others, you know, some of the king's officials gave another 2,600 Passover offerings of lambs and 300 bulls. And so then there was others that gave 5,000 Passover lambs and another 500 bulls. So there was an awful lot of animals being slaughtered during this time. And in fact, there were so many that then they had to enlist the aid of some of the other the Levites that normally didn't get to participate in any of that, because that's priestly duties. But they drafted them to come in there and help them skin the animals and prepare them and everything for the various sacrifices, the requirements of the sacrifice that they had to do. And so it was quite the deal. They had never had a Passover like that since, it says, the days of Samuel. And so not even David had Passover like these guys did. And so and that's mostly what chapter 35 is just going through the entire list of of the preparations that they did, how many of the um, the animals were sacrificed, and what they did, just very detailed as to what that particular um, thing, what that particular Passover was like. Now, and it says this Passover was celebrated in the 18th year of the reign of Josiah. That 18th year was a very busy year for him. And so here he is, 26 years old, and he's having this. And so he goes on, he has another 15 years after that he's or 13 years, something like that, of reign. So, and then it says, then we go on, let's finish this off. After all this, and what is after all this? How long is that? Does this take place? This is at the end of Josiah's reign. So this would have been at the his 31st year, 32nd year. I think it's 31st year of his reign, that King Necho of Egypt had come up to fight at Carchemish on the Euphrates, and Josiah went out to engage him. But Necho sent messengers to him, says, "What is there between me and you, King of Judah? I'm not coming against you today, but against the house that wars with me, and God has ordered me to hurry. Stop for your sake from meddling with God who is with me, so that he will not destroy you." Josiah, however, would not turn away from him, but disguised himself in order to fight him. He did not listen to Necho's words from the mouth of God, and went to fight him in the plain of Megiddo. Archers shot King Josiah, and the king said to his servants, "Take me away, for I am seriously wounded." So his servants carried him out of the chariot and put him in a second chariot that he had. They brought him to Jerusalem, where he died and was buried in the tombs of his fathers. All Judah and Jerusalem mourned over Josiah. Now Jeremiah composed laments for Josiah, and to this day, all the singers, male and female, commemorated Josiah in their laments. And they made them an ordinance in Israel, and behold, they are written in the Lamentations. Now the rest of the acts of Josiah and his deeds of devotion, as written in the Torah of Adonai, and his acts, the first and the last, behold, they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. All right, now so Necho was actually coming up to join Assyria in this battle against the Babylonians. All right, that's what this battle was all about. And Josiah, he preferred the Babylonians, and decided to go up and fight the king of Egypt against, because they were Egypt and Assyria were coming against the Babylonians. He'd rather be with the Babylonians. Maybe Josiah could see the wind of change, how it was happening, why he would have picked Babylon rather than Assyria, other than the fact that the Assyrians had been such nasty people throughout the generations against Israel, and he saw that. We don't know, but anyway, he picked a side, and Necho warned him. I find it interesting that Necho is saying, "Look, your God has told me to go up here and do this, and yet you're coming against me." Well, he entered the battle as a common soldier. He was wounded by archers, and he eventually died. So the backstory on some of this is that here's Carchemish up here, and Necho had come up all the way to Carchemish, and they were fighting because Babylon had come up from here, and of course right in here is Asherah, which was the capital of the Assyrian Empire, right about in here. But Carchemish was a very, very important trade route, very big, influential city, and it was known for its paved streets. And I don't know what all that is, but anyway, this battle at Carchemish, as it turned out, what happened is that Babylon defeated Assyria here at Carchemish. There are a couple of battles, and the king of Judah was killed, and Necho went back here. But because Judah had come against him, then on his way back, he decided, okay, I'm just going to take Israel, or take Judah and Jerusalem, and you will be my vassal states. And so for several years, Judah had to pay money and tribute to Necho, the pharaoh. But at the end of time, at the end of all of it, at Carchemish, Babylon defeated Assyria, and Assyria was no more. They got absorbed. Babylon was now the major empire of the world at that point, and so that sets us up then for what we see. Here's some pictures, and I really don't know what those things are, but here's some pictures of Carchemish today. There, this mound, that's part of it right there, and here's some more parts of it here. And so that is, I don't know what happened there. Okay, while we have those little lines, but I'm going to have to fix it. So anyway, that is that's the lesson for tonight. Are there